Hello, my name is Nicholas Grant, 37 years old. I was once a major in the United States Army. Now I sit here in a small apartment on the outskirts of Denver, Colorado, gazing out a misty window where the faint outlines of the Rocky Mountains loom like a reminder that my life has changed forever. I am no longer the brave soldier who marched through battlefields, nor the eldest son who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. I'm just Nick, a man with scars on his body and soul trying to rediscover the meaning of the word family. But to tell my story, I need to take you back to the beginning, where it all started, where I once thought I understood love and sacrifice. I was born and raised in Fort Collins, Colorado, a small town with tree-lined streets of oaks and red brick houses nestled close together. My family lived at the end of Maple Street in a modest two-story home with a white picket fence faded by time. That was where my parents, George and Eleanor Grant, raised the three of us siblings. I was the eldest, followed by my brother Dylan, 4 years younger, and our little sister Lily, 7 years my junior. We were a middle-class family, not wealthy but never wanting for anything. My father was a mechanic, a tall, broad-shouldered man with rough hands always stained with motor oil. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, his words carried the weight of a sledgehammer. My mother, on the other hand, was a petite woman with blonde hair who worked as a secretary at a law firm. She had a warm smile, but eyes that always held a trace of worry, the kind of worry only a mother has, constantly fearing for her children. My childhood was like a simple yet warm painting. I remember summer afternoons when Dylan and I would ride our bikes around the neighborhood pretending to be fighter pilots, while Lily, still too young, toddled behind on her short legs, yelling for us to slow down. Dad would sit on the porch reading the newspaper, occasionally looking up to shout, "Watch out for cars, you two." Mom would be busy in the kitchen preparing sandwiches or a batch of fragrant cookies. Life back then was uncomplicated, as if the entire world revolved around Maple Street and the laughter echoing from our backyard. But what shaped me most, perhaps, were my grandfather's stories. My grandfather, Charles Grant, was a Marine in World War II. Whenever he visited, he'd sit in the old armchair in our living room recounting tales of his time on the battlefield, of comrades, of facing death. His voice was low and gravelly, his eyes clouded with age, but still bright when he spoke of courage and camaraderie. "You know, Nick," he once said, placing a hand on my shoulder, "being a soldier isn't about winning. It's about protecting the ones you love." Those words carved themselves into my mind like a smoldering ember burning steadily in the chest of a 10-year-old boy. It was those stories that led me to a military career. At 17, I announced to my parents that I wanted to join the Army after graduating high school. It was a winter evening, and we were gathered around the dinner table as Mom ladled pumpkin soup into bowls. I still remember the way she dropped the spoon onto the table with a sharp clink. "No way, Nicholas," she nearly shouted, her eyes wide with horror. "Do you know what your grandfather went through? The scars, the nightmares. Do you want that for yourself?" My father, usually silent during arguments, spoke up this time. "Nick, you're a smart kid. You could go to college, become an engineer or a doctor. The Army isn't the place for you." His voice was heavy, as if he were trying to steer me away from a path he knew would be filled with blood and tears. But I had made up my mind. I couldn't fully explain the feeling. It was just that something bigger, stronger was driving me. Perhaps it was the fire my grandfather had kindled, or maybe it was a desire to test myself, to become a protector like he had been. I looked at my parents, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't want an ordinary life. I want to do something meaningful." The argument dragged on for months. Mom cried, Dad shook his head, but I stood firm. Finally, when I signed the enlistment papers at 18, my parents just looked at me in silence. Mom hugged me tightly, whispering, "Promise me you'll stay safe, Nick." I nodded, but deep down I knew that promise was as fragile as a thread. The Army became my second home. I enlisted in 2006, starting as a private, training at Fort Benning, Georgia. Those early days were grueling. 5 a.m. runs, combat drills that left my body aching, and nights lying in bed wondering if I was truly strong enough. But I pushed through. I learned how to shoot, how to survive in the wilderness, how to stay calm when everything around me fell apart, and I loved it. Not for the violence, but for the sense of belonging to something greater than myself. I climbed the ranks quickly. By 25, I was a captain. By 32, I was a major. I was deployed to Afghanistan, Iraq, and a few places I'm not allowed to name. Each mission was a brush with danger where death lurked just behind me. I saw comrades fall, heard bombs explode mere meters away, felt the icy chill of death's blade at my throat. But I never faltered. I thought of my grandfather, his stories, and I told myself, I have to be strong, for my family, for the ones I love. Family, that was the fire that kept me going. Even thousands of miles away, I thought of my parents, Dylan and Lily. I sent nearly all my paychecks home. My parents had retired when I was 24, living off a modest pension. Dylan was studying engineering in college, and Lily, my little sister, was dreaming of becoming a fashion designer. I wanted them to have a better life, free from financial worries. Every month, I wired money to my parents' account along with a short letter. I'm fine, don't worry, love to everyone. I never mentioned the sleepless nights, the times I woke up drenched in sweat from nightmares. I didn't want them to worry, but I rarely came home. My military life kept me constantly on the move. In a year, I'd return to Fort Collins only once or twice, usually for Thanksgiving or Christmas. During those visits, I tried to savor every moment. I remember the smell of Mom's cookies, Lily's laughter as she talked about the boys chasing her, and Dad's thoughtful nods when I shared stories about military life. But I didn't realize that over those years my family was changing. They still loved me, I knew. But the distance between us was growing, like a small crack I hadn't even noticed. When I was 33, everything fell apart. During a mission to rescue comrades in Afghanistan, I was severely injured. A mine exploded near where my team and I were taking cover. All I remember is a deafening blast, then a burning pain in my left leg. When I woke up, I was in a military hospital, my body bandaged, my head spinning. The doctor said I was lucky to be alive, but the cost was steep. I lost some mobility in my left leg, suffered hearing damage in my right ear, and chronic pain began to haunt me like a curse. Worse, I was diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Nightmares of the battlefield, the sound of explosions, and the faces of fallen comrades tormented me every night. I was awarded the Purple Heart in the hospital, an honor any soldier would take pride in. But as I held that cold medal, I felt only emptiness. It couldn't ease the pain or restore what I'd lost. My career ended there. I was discharged, not because I wanted to, but because my body could no longer keep up. I returned to the U.S., not as a hero, but as a broken man trying to piece himself back together. I decided to return to Fort Collins that Thanksgiving, unannounced. I wanted to surprise my parents, show them the medal, tell them I was okay, even though I knew it was a lie. I thought my family would be the place to heal my wounds, that their love would soothe my nightmares. But I didn't know that in that familiar house a painful truth was waiting for me. A truth that would make me question everything I had ever sacrificed for. When I stepped off the bus, clutching the Purple Heart medal, I looked at the house on Maple Street. The white picket fence was still there, but now more chipped and peeling. The oak tree in the front yard still stood tall, yet something felt different, as if time had faded everything. I took a deep breath, trying to muster a smile. I'm home, I told myself. But deep inside, a sense of unease began to creep in, as if I were about to walk into a storm I hadn't seen coming. I slung my military duffel bag over my shoulder and walked slowly up the path to the house. Each step was a small battle with the aching pain in my left leg. The chronic pain had become an uninvited companion, a constant reminder that I was no longer the strong soldier I once was. In my right hand, I gripped the wooden box containing the Purple Heart, the one thing I hoped would make my parents proud. I imagined my mother hugging me, tears streaming down her face and my father placing a hand on my shoulder as he used to when I was a boy. "Well done, son," I pictured him saying. But that uneasy feeling clung to me like a silent shadow trailing behind. It was nearly Thanksgiving and the crisp Fort Collins air draped everything in a thin layer of frost. I glanced around the neighborhood, the houses aglow with lights, the faint smell of wood smoke from fireplaces and the distant sound of children laughing. It was all so familiar, yet I felt like a stranger. Standing at the front door, I took a long breath and knocked. I hadn't told them I was coming, wanting to surprise them. Part of me hoped my mother would rush out and envelop me in a hug, like she did when I returned from far-off deployments. The door opened and there was Mom, her eyes wide with shock. "Nicholas!" she cried, her voice trembling. She rushed forward, wrapping her arms around me so tightly I nearly lost my balance. I felt the warmth of her old sweater, the familiar scent of her light perfume. "Why didn't you say anything? I had no idea you were coming," she said, pulling me inside, her small hands gripping my arm as if afraid I'd vanish. "I wanted to surprise you," I said with a smile, trying to mask the stab of pain in my leg as I stepped into the living room. Dad was sitting in his armchair, newspaper folded in his hands as he looked up at me. His eyes lit up, but there was a cautiousness in them, as if he were trying to read me. "Nick," he nodded, standing to clap a hand on my shoulder. "You're back, son." I nodded, a warmth spreading through me. This was home, my family, the place I'd thought of during long nights on the battlefield. But as I looked around, I noticed small changes. The family photo on the mantel had been replaced with a new frame showing Dylan and Lily at their graduations. The old photo, where the four of us beamed during a camping trip, was gone. I told myself Mom was probably just rearranging, but that uneasy feeling stirred again, stronger now. "Where are Dylan and Lily?" I asked, settling onto the sofa. The couch felt familiar, but its fabric was worn as if time had eroded it, just as it was eroding me. "Dylan's working in Denver. He'll probably be here tomorrow," Mom replied, bustling to the kitchen to grab a glass of orange juice. "Lily's in New York, working for a fashion company. She's busy, but she promised to come for Thanksgiving." I nodded, feeling a pang of disappointment. I'd hoped the whole family would be here, gathered like the old days. But I reminded myself things had changed. Dylan was now an engineer, living a stable life. Lily, the little girl who used to chase me for stories, was an ambitious fashion designer. And me? I was just a veteran, jobless, with no clear future, only scars and a medal. I pulled the wooden box from my bag and opened it, revealing the purple heart gleaming under the living room light. "I wanted to show you this," I said, my voice slightly shaky. "They gave it to me for my last mission." Mom froze, the glass of orange juice hovering midair. She stepped closer, her eyes wide, and touched the metal as if it were fragile. "Oh, Nick," she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. "What did you have to go through to earn this?" Dad stepped closer, looking at the metal, then at me. "You've made me proud," he said, his voice low but firm. But something in his eyes unsettled me, a hesitation as if he wanted to say more but held back. I gave them a brief, sanitized version of what happened. I didn't mention the mine's deafening blast, the nights I woke drenched in sweat from nightmares, feeling like I was still on the battlefield. I only said I was injured, that I saved my team, and that I was now discharged. Mom hugged me again, and Dad just nodded as if trying to process my story. That night, I lay on my old bed in my childhood room, staring at the ceiling. The small cracks in the plaster were still there, like a map of days gone by. But I couldn't sleep. The pain in my left leg throbbed with every movement, and the ringing in my right ear was relentless. I grabbed the bottle of painkillers from my bag, swallowing 2 without water, and closed my eyes, hoping sleep would come. Instead, images from the battlefield flooded back, explosions, screams, and the faces of comrades I couldn't save. I bolted upright, heart pounding, sweat dripping down my forehead. I got up and quietly left my room, intending to grab a glass of water from the kitchen. The house was cloaked in darkness, lit only by the faint glow of a nightlight in the living room. As I passed my parents' room, I heard hushed voices. It was Mom, her voice trembling, as if holding back emotion. I stopped, not meaning to eavesdrop, but her words froze me in place. "George, do you think we did the right thing?" she said, her voice low but clear. "About the will?" The will? My heart tightened. I stood there, motionless, as if my body had turned to stone. I knew I shouldn't listen, but my feet wouldn't move. Dad responded, his voice lower. "Eleanor, we've discussed this. Dylan and Lily need the inheritance more. Nicholas was a soldier. He has a pension, a stable life. He doesn't need anything from us." Each word from Dad stabbed into my chest like a knife. I tried to breathe, but the air felt thick. They were leaving everything to Dylan and Lily and me, the one who sent nearly every paycheck home, who sacrificed his health, his career, his entire life. Got nothing? My head pounded, my ears rang, not from my injury, but from the painful truth slamming into my heart. "But Nick, I'm worried about him," Mom said, her voice choking. "He's just been discharged, badly injured. If we don't leave him anything, is that fair to him?" "Eleanor, he's strong," Dad replied, his voice firm but cold. "He'll manage. Dylan and Lily are young. They need the support to build their futures. Nick has his medal, his honor. He doesn't need this house or our savings." I couldn't listen anymore. I stepped back, my left leg trembling, my hand gripping the sofa to keep from falling. My mind spun. All the years I sacrificed, the letters I wrote, the money I sent home. Did they mean nothing? They thought I was stable? They thought I didn't need anything because I was a soldier. I wanted to burst into their room, scream, ask why they were treating me this way. But I couldn't. I just stood there in the dark, feeling my heart shatter. I barely slept that night. Early the next morning, before the sun rose, I got up. I couldn't stay in that house another minute. I packed my things, stuffed the Purple Heart into my duffel bag, and left a short note on the kitchen table. "I have to go. Don't worry about me." I didn't want to face my parents or hear their explanations. Their words from the night before were clear enough. I walked out of the house, my bag heavy on my shoulder, the Purple Heart silent in its box. The sky was still dark, the oak tree in the yard standing still as if witnessing my pain. I didn't have a car and didn't want to turn back. I limped to the bus stop a few blocks away, each step a stab of pain in my left leg, as if reminding me of everything I'd lost. At the stop, I sat on a cold bench waiting for the earliest bus to Denver. I chose Denver because of Jake, a battle buddy who once saved me during an ambush in Afghanistan. He'd said if I needed a place to start over, Denver was the place. "There are people there who'll help you, Nick," he'd told me. I clung to that promise, though only a sliver of hope remained. On the bus, passengers' eyes darted toward me, curious, tinged with pity. An older man noticed my limp, his gaze questioning, but he turned away. I lowered my head, avoiding their stares, wishing I could disappear. The pain in my leg throbbed, the ringing in my right ear like a haunting tune. But the worst pain was in my heart, crushed by the realization that my family, the ones I'd sacrificed everything to protect, didn't see me as part of them. When the bus reached Denver, I made my way to the Denver Veterans Service Center, a low-rise building on Broadway. Jake had mentioned it, saying they helped veterans find housing, jobs, and therapy for invisible scars. I walked in, my duffel bag still heavy, my heart pounding. A staff member with a warm voice asked what I needed. I need a place to stay," I said, my voice faltering. "And maybe someone to talk to." They led me to a counselor who asked about my injuries, my PTSD, and what I'd been through. I told them hesitantly about the battlefield, my family, and the will. They listened and spoke about temporary housing programs, physical therapy, and peer support groups. I began Blueberry to feel a small spark, not quite hope, but a sense that I wasn't entirely alone. That day, the center arranged for me to stay in a temporary boarding house in downtown Denver. The room had only a single bed, an old wooden table, and a window overlooking a bustling street. The noise of traffic outside couldn't drown out the ringing in my right ear, nor could it soothe the sharp pain in my left leg every time I shifted position. But the deepest pain was still in my heart, a raw, bleeding wound from my parents' words about the will, from the realization that I, who had sacrificed everything, meant nothing to them. Around 11 a.m. that day, my phone buzzed incessantly, the screen lighting up with calls from Mom and texts from Dad. "Nick, where are you? Come home. We need to talk, Nicholas. Mom's worried sick." I stared at the messages, my fingers hovering over the screen, but I didn't respond. Each text was like a knife, rekindling both my pain and my anger. They were worried? They needed me? Then why did they only leave the inheritance to Dylan and Lily? I, the eldest, who sacrificed more for the family than anyone, was treated like a stranger? I turned off the phone, tossed it onto the bed, and closed my eyes, trying to block out the images of the house on Maple Street. I couldn't go back. I couldn't keep living as I had, as a soldier who put family above everything even when they didn't value it. For 15 years in the military, I sent nearly all my paychecks home. I gave up personal dreams, relationships, just so my parents could live comfortably, so Dylan and Lily could go to college and build their futures. But now, when I was broken, when I needed them most, they saw me as stable, someone who needed nothing but an empty medal and hollow honor. I opened my duffel bag, took out the wooden box holding the Purple Heart, and looked at it under the light. It gleamed, but to me it was just a reminder of what I'd lost: my body, my career, and my faith in family. That night I lay in bed listening to the traffic outside and the pounding of my heart. A decision crystallized, cold but clear. I would stop sacrificing. It was time to live for myself. No more monthly money transfers, no more brief letters hiding my pain. I didn't want to be the eldest son carrying the world anymore. I wanted to rediscover Nicholas Grant, not Major Grant, not the big brother, but just Nick, an ordinary man with dreams long buried. The next morning I went to the bank, clutching my veteran's ID. I canceled the joint account I'd used to send money to my parents. The bank teller, a middle-aged woman with a polite smile, asked if I was sure. "You've been sending money to this account regularly for years," she said, her eyes curious. I nodded, my voice firm. "I'm sure." As I signed the paperwork, I felt a strange liberation, as if I'd shed an invisible chain. But a twinge of guilt crept in. Was I being too selfish? Would my parents, Dylan and Lily, be okay without me? Then I remembered Dad's words. "Nicholas has a pension, he doesn't need anything." Anger surged, drowning out any hesitation. They'd chosen how to treat me, and now I'd choose how to live. I returned to the Denver Veterans Service Center, where my counselor, Tom, a Vietnam War veteran, was waiting. Tom had a weathered face and calm eyes that had seen too much pain. "You okay, Nick?" he asked, gesturing to the chair across from him. I sat, my hand unconsciously rubbing my left leg. I don't know," I replied, my voice hoarse. "I just canceled the account I used to send money to my family. I'm done." Tom nodded, non-judgmental. The inner struggle is something we all face, especially when family hurts us. But you need to ask yourself, what do you want for your future? I fell silent. Future. I hadn't thought about that word since the mine exploded in Afghanistan. All I'd known was survival. Now faced with living for myself, I felt lost. Tom suggested I join a peer support group where veterans shared their post-war lives, their struggles, and their first steps toward reintegration. I hesitated but agreed. I didn't want to be a burden, and I knew I needed to do something to move forward. The center also arranged a small apartment for me through a veterans housing program, cleaner than the boarding house and subsidized. "This is a start, Nick," Tom said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to do it alone." The weeks that followed were a blur of hope and despair. I started attending the support group at the center. For the first time, I sat in a circle of plastic chairs, facing men and women with scars like mine, not just physical but emotional. A man named Carlos, a former Marine, spoke of nightmares that woke him screaming as if still on the battlefield. A woman named Sarah, a former pilot, shared her feelings of uselessness in civilian life. I listened, and for the first time I felt I wasn't alone. When it was my turn, I faltered. "I'm Nick," I began, my voice trembling. "I was a major. I got injured in Afghanistan, lost some mobility in my leg, have tinnitus and PTSD. But what hurts most isn't the battlefield, it's my family. They don't need me." I told them about the will, my years of sacrifice, and the shock that drove me from Fort Collins. When I finished, the room was silent. Carlos nodded as if he understood. After the session, Sarah handed me a coffee, saying softly, "Give yourself time, Nick. You deserve to live for you." Those sessions helped me open up, if only a little. I also started physical therapy at the center, working on exercises to improve my left leg's mobility. Each movement was painful, but I gritted my teeth. I didn't want my injuries to define me. I attended counseling with Tom, learning to manage my PTSD. He taught me breathing techniques to control panic attacks and journaling to release dark thoughts. I began writing, even if just scribbled lines about war, family, and pain. As I tried to rebuild, my family began feeling the consequences of my decision. A month after I canceled the account, Mom texted, her tone frantic. "Nick, please, we're struggling. Bills are piling up and Dad can't cover the debts. Can you help?" I sat in my apartment, my mind in turmoil. Part of me wanted to give in, to send money, to be the eldest son again. But then I recalled Dad's words. "Nicholas doesn't need anything from us." I took a deep breath and replied coldly, "Ask the heirs you chose, not me." I turned off my phone, my heart pounding. That message was both a dagger to myself and a declaration of freedom. I felt pain, but also relief, as if I'd stepped out of an invisible prison. Mom called again, texting repeatedly, "Nick, I'm sorry, we didn't mean to hurt you. Please talk to us." But I didn't respond. I couldn't, not yet. In the months that followed, I heard from an old Fort Collins neighbor that my family was struggling. My parents couldn't pay the mortgage on the Maple Street house, utility bills were piling up, and they'd cut expenses to the bone. Dylan, now an engineer in Denver, tried to help, but his salary barely covered his own life. Lily in New York sent small amounts occasionally, but it wasn't enough to save them. Part of me felt guilty. I knew my parents didn't mean to hurt me, that they thought I was stable. But a larger part, the part wounded too deeply, whispered, "They chose this. Now they face it." Meanwhile, I took steps to live for myself. I found a part-time job at a Denver gym, assisting trainers with basic exercises. The pay wasn't great, but it gave me purpose, a reason to leave my apartment each morning. I met colleagues who didn't know my past, didn't look at me with pity. They called me Nick, the guy who was always cheerful and punctual, and I began to like that version of myself. But living for myself didn't mean I was healed. Nightmares still came, pulling me back to the battlefield, to explosions and fallen comrades. Some nights I woke drenched in sweat, heart racing, sitting by the window, breathing deeply to remind myself I was in Denver, not Afghanistan. Therapy with Tom helped me cope, but PTSD was a persistent enemy lurking in the shadows. I started finding joy in simple things. I bought a small notebook and wrote more, not just about war, but about what I wanted to do. I wrote about wanting to draw again, a childhood hobby I'd abandoned. I wrote about wanting to travel, even if just a short trip to the Rockies near Denver. Those scribbled words, however simple, made me feel alive, like I still had a future to reach for. One day, as I sat in my apartment looking out at Denver's sprawling skyline, my phone buzzed again. It was Dylan. "Nick, I know you're angry," he said, his voice low. "But Mom and Dad need you. They didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't know about the will until you left." I stayed silent, gripping the phone. I wanted to believe him, to go back, but I couldn't forget my parents' words. "Take care of them yourself, Dylan," I replied coldly. "I've done enough." I hung up, looking at the Purple Heart on the table. It no longer shone as it had in the hospital, but it still reminded me of my courage. I'd faced war, death, and wounds that would never heal. Now I was facing another battle, to find myself again. I told myself, "You deserve happiness, Nick. Don't stop." The months that followed in Denver were a slow but meaningful journey. I continued my part-time job at the gym, regularly attended the peer support group, and kept up with physical therapy and counseling sessions with Tom. While I was gradually rediscovering myself, my family in Fort Collins was grappling with the consequences of my decision. I still didn't answer calls or texts from Mom and Dad. My phone buzzed daily, but I let it fall silent, the screen lighting up then fading. I wasn't ready to face them, not ready to hear explanations about the will or why they thought I was stable and needed nothing. But one morning, as I sat in my apartment sketching the oak tree from our old house, a long text from Mom stopped me cold. "Nick, I don't know where you are, but I hope you read this," the message began. "We sold the house on Maple Street. We couldn't pay the debts and the bank foreclosed. Now Dad and I live in a smaller house in Loveland, just a few miles from Fort Collins. I know you're angry, and I don't blame you. You did so much for our family and we didn't see it. I'm sorry, Nick. I'm not asking for money or help. I just want your forgiveness, to see you again, to make up for the hurt I caused. I love you, son." I read the message over and over, my hands trembling. They sold the house on Maple Street where I grew up, where I rode bikes with Dylan, where Lily chased after us begging for stories. The oak tree, the white fence, the smell of Mom's cookies, all now just memories. But what stunned me was Mom's tone. No blame, no demands for money, only remorse and love. Another message from Dad followed. "Nick, I was wrong. I didn't realize how much you sacrificed. I just want you to know you've always been my pride. Give me a chance to make it right." I sat there, phone in hand, feeling like my heart was torn in two. Part of me wanted to delete the messages, to stay angry, to keep my distance, to protect myself. But another part, the one that still remembered Mom's hugs and Dad's thoughtful nods, whispered that maybe it was time to forgive. I brought the story to my session with Tom. I told him about the messages, the sale of the Maple Street house, and the pain still smoldering inside me. Tom listened, his calm eyes never leaving mine. "Nick, you've come a long way," he said. "You've learned to live for yourself, to face your wounds. But learning to forgive is part of this journey too." I asked him, "But what if they hurt me again? What if I open up and get betrayed?" Tom smiled, a sad but knowing smile. "Forgiveness is a risk, Nick. But not forgiving is also a risk. The risk of carrying that pain forever. Which one can you live with?" Tom's question lingered for days. I wrote about it in my journal, sketched it in my drawings, images of the old house, my parents, Dylan and Lily. I realized that despite the hurt, I still loved my family. They weren't perfect, but they were my family. And maybe, just maybe, they were truly sorry. A week later, I made my decision. I called Dylan and asked for my parents' new address in Loveland. "Nick, you're really coming?" Dylan asked, his voice a mix of surprise and joy. "I'll let them know. They'll be thrilled." I didn't say much, just nodded over the phone, a mix of nervousness and anticipation rising within me. I took a bus to Loveland, a short trip but heavy with emotion. The pain in my left leg flared with every jolt of the bus, but I focused on what awaited me. When the bus stopped in a quiet neighborhood, I stepped off, my military duffel bag slung over my shoulder. My parents' new home was a modest single-story house with a small front garden and a simple wooden fence. It wasn't the Maple Street house, but it still held a familiar feeling, the feeling of family. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding. Mom opened it, her eyes widening, then she rushed forward and hugged me, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Nick, my boy," she choked out, her small arms wrapping tightly around me as if afraid I'd vanish. Dad stood behind her, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile. "Come in, son," he said, his voice low but warm. We sat in the small living room on an old sofa they'd brought from the old house. Mom brought out a tray of cookies, the same kind she made when I was a kid, their aroma pulling me back to Maple Street days. They told me about the tough months, the sale of the house, and how they realized they'd been wrong to overlook my sacrifices. "I never wanted you to feel unimportant," Mom said, holding my hand. "I just wanted Dylan and Lily to have a good start. But I forgot that you needed me too." Dad nodded, adding, "I've revised the will, Nick. You get an equal share, like Dylan and Lily. But more than that, I want you to know you're my pride. Not because of the medal, but because you're my son." I listened silently, feeling the walls around my heart crumble. I told them about Denver, the support group, my sketches, and the nights I fought nightmares. For the first time, I felt they truly understood me. Not as Major Grant, but as Nick, their son trying to heal. Dylan and Lily arrived that weekend, turning the reunion into a special occasion. Dylan brought a case of beer and a firm hug. "I'm sorry, Nick," he said. "I always respected you, but I didn't know how much you gave up." Lily, fresh from New York, gave me a hand-embroidered handkerchief, her eyes glistening. "I always bragged to my friends about my hero brother," she said. "But I didn't know what it cost you. I'm sorry, Nick." We ate dinner together around a small table in the new house. No turkey or twinkling lights like Thanksgiving, but that meal was warmer than any holiday I'd experienced. We laughed, shared stories, and for the first time in years, I felt I truly belonged. Dad placed my Purple Heart in a small glass frame on the table. It was no longer a symbol of pain, but a reminder of my journey. From the battlefield, through heartbreak, to this day of reunion. Returning to Denver after the reunion in Loveland, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if a heavy stone had been lifted from my chest. My family was no longer an open wound, but a part of my healing journey. Yet I knew my journey wasn't over. I was still searching for new meaning in life, not as Major Grant, not as the eldest son carrying the world, but as Nick, a man learning to live for himself. My job at the gym remained an anchor. Guiding basic exercises, chatting with clients, and hearing their everyday stories made me feel valued. The pain in my left leg still flared when I stood too long, and the ringing in my right ear remained an uninvited companion. But I'd learned to accept them just as I accepted the scars on my body and soul. Physical therapy at the Denver Veterans Service Center helped improve my mobility, even if only slightly. Counseling sessions with Tom taught me to confront my PTSD, to recognize that nightmares didn't define me, but what truly transformed me was painting. I started with simple sketches in my small notebook, the Rocky Mountains, the oak tree from our old house, my grandfather's face. Gradually, I bought watercolors, brushes, and a few cheap canvases from an art store near my apartment. I painted at night when Denver fell quiet, with only the ringing in my ear and the rhythm of my heartbeat for company. I painted the battlefield, not to dwell in suffering, but to turn those memories into art. My paintings were filled with bold lines and intense colors. A soldier standing amid smoke and fire, a helicopter soaring through a blood-red sky, a hand reaching out from rubble. They weren't beautiful in a conventional way, but they were raw, real, and mine. One evening at the peer support group, I brought a painting, a battlefield scene with a soldier cradling a wounded comrade, eyes full of determination. I hesitated to share it with the group. Carlos, usually quiet, stared at it for a long time before nodding. "You captured our soul, Nick." Sarah, with her gentle smile, said, "You should do something with these paintings. They're not just art. They're your story." Their praise left me flustered but proud. For the first time, I felt I could create something meaningful, not with a gun or sacrifice, but with my own hands. I started posting my paintings on a social media platform Sarah recommended. At first, I just wanted to keep them as an online journal, but comments began to appear. "This painting made me cry," one person wrote. "I'm a veteran too, and I see myself in it," another commented. A small art gallery in Denver contacted me, asking if I'd like to display a few pieces in an exhibition for local artists. I could hardly believe my ears. "I'm not a professional artist," I told the gallery manager, a middle-aged woman named Ellen. She smiled. "You don't need to be professional, you just need to tell your story." The exhibition took place on a summer evening in a cozy space with warm yellow lights and white walls. I stood there, limping in an old suit, watching my paintings hang on the walls. Visitors, from art lovers to veterans, paused before each piece, whispering to one another. An older man wearing a veteran's cap shook my hand and said, "Thank you for showing us what we've been through." I nodded, my throat tight. For the first time, I felt the Purple Heart, now framed at my parents' house, wasn't the only thing defining my courage. In my journey to rediscover myself, I not only found passion but also rekindled old connections. One afternoon, while cleaning up after a shift at the gym, a social media notification stopped me in my tracks. It was an invitation to a high school reunion in Fort Collins. I hesitated. I'd left Fort Collins to escape painful memories, but after reuniting with my family, I felt strong enough to face the past. The reunion was held at a small restaurant in Fort Collins with twinkling lights and soft music. I walked in, leaning on a cane to ease the pressure on my left leg, feeling out of place among familiar yet distant faces. Then I saw her, Tracy, my old high school classmate who sat next to me in chemistry class junior year. Tracy was the same, with her glossy brown hair and gentle smile, but now she carried the confidence of a grown woman. "Nick Grant," Tracy called, her eyes lighting up as she recognized me. "Is that really you?" We hugged, a brief but warm embrace. Tracy was now an English teacher at a Denver high school. She told me about her life, her mischievous students, and the days she wrote poetry to unwind. I shared my story, military service, my injuries, and my journey with painting. She listened without judgment, her eyes full of empathy but not pity. We talked all evening as if the 18 years since graduation hadn't passed. Tracy asked about the paintings I'd posted online, and I shyly told her about the exhibition. "You have to show me," she said, her voice excited. "I always knew you had talent, Nick. Remember when you drew that bird on the chalkboard? The chemistry teacher almost punished you." We laughed, and for the first time in years, my heart felt light, unburdened by pain. After the reunion, Tracy and I stayed in touch regularly. She texted, called, and sometimes stopped by the gym with coffee. "I don't want you drinking that awful gym coffee," she'd say, winking as she handed me a fragrant latte. I began looking forward to our meetings, our long conversations about everything: books, movies, the dreams we had as kids. One evening, Tracy invited me to her Denver apartment to watch a movie. I arrived bringing a small painting, a sketch of the Rockies at sunset. "For you," I said, feeling my face flush. Tracy looked at the painting, then at me, her eyes sparkling. "Nick, this is the most beautiful gift I've ever received," she said, then hugged me. The hug lingered longer than usual, and when she looked at me, I knew something was shifting. Our relationship grew naturally, like a gentle river. Tracy didn't just admire my courage on the battlefield. She valued my resilience in overcoming adversity. She listened when I spoke about my nightmares, my PTSD, and the days I felt worthless. "You're the strongest person I know, Nick," she said one evening as we sat on a park bench watching the sunset. "Not because you were a soldier, but because you never give up." I opened up to Tracy more than anyone else. I told her about my family, the will, and the day I reunited with my parents in Loveland. She held my hand, saying nothing, but her presence made me feel safe. We began making plans together: short trips to the Rockies, movie nights at the theater, even the idea of opening a small cafe where I could display my paintings and Tracy could host poetry readings for her students. A year after reuniting with my family, I stood in the small Denver gallery for my second exhibition. This time I displayed not only war paintings, but also ones about my new life, my family, Tracy, the mountains, and Colorado's blue skies. My parents, Dylan and Lily, were there, standing proudly among the crowd. Mom hugged me, whispering, "You make me so proud, Nick." Dad clapped my shoulder, a rare smile on his weathered face. Dylan and Lily teased me about my too serious suit, but their eyes were full of love. Tracy stood beside me, her hand tightly clasped in mine. She wore a simple blue dress, her smile radiant as sunlight. "You did it, Nick," she said, looking at the paintings on the walls. "You turned your scars into art." I looked at her, my heart overflowing, not with pain, but with happiness. After the exhibition, Tracy and I walked along the South Platte River, the city lights reflecting on the water. I pulled a small box from my pocket containing a simple ring. "Tracy," I said, my voice trembling, "you helped me find myself again. I want to build a future with you, whatever it holds. Will you be my partner?" She looked at me, her eyes glistening, and nodded. "Yes, Nick, I will." We embraced under Denver's starry sky, and for the first time everything felt right. The Purple Heart, now framed at my parents' house, was no longer a symbol of what I'd lost, but a reminder of what I'd found: family, passion, and love. I've walked through dark days, from the bombs in Afghanistan to the shock of my family's will and the nights wrestling with PTSD. But I've learned that no matter how cruel life can be, you can choose to rise. My advice is to learn to forgive, but never forget your own worth. Family, friends, or even war may hurt you, but only you decide how to heal. Paint, love, or simply breathe under the night sky. Find what makes you feel alive. I found happiness in brushstrokes, in Tracy's embrace, and in family dinners. You'll find your light too, if you keep moving forward.